Hey everyone, welcome to week 41. This is day 4. This is Thursday. This is our ongoing interpreting our reference week. We've painted, what is it? 2 portraits, Danny's sneakers, and we're going to go back to painting a portrait. And ideally, what we want to do is not compete with the photograph. Remember, our photograph, our reference, is not our end goal. That's not where we want to go. We want to feed stuff from that photograph into our painting. That's where we're going to feel the most useful. So we'll see how we do today. Okay, let's get started. This is day 4. This is our ongoing interpreting our reference week. So just as a small recap, on Monday, I painted a self-portrait. We started with my ugly mug. And what we realized that we could get from that photograph was the sense that there was unity in light and unity in shadow. And when I noticed that that was something that caught my attention, I immediately realized that I could speak about that sense of wholeness that was in the light and wholeness that was in the shadow. Usually we get specificity in light and then openness in shadow. But I wanted to see if I could paint my portrait and speak about the bigness in both instances. So I kind of kept this general quality in the light, this general quality in the shadow, and I just kind of slowly grounded with a couple of drawing marks some areas of the features. And I think that that gave me enough kind of subtle points of interest in the traveling of the portrait. So I was very satisfied with that. I was able to maintain bigness and yet concentrate just a little bit on a couple of little details. And through that attention to wholeness, realized that I could speak about myself, that I could actually evoke who I am, evoke my essence without feeling the need to go for the smallness of details that are usually inherent to the development of features. So that was very nice. It was about understanding that there is a ton of information in a photograph, but we can actually edit that photograph. We can actually pick whatever information is relevant to the image that we're painting and then emphasize those elements. On Tuesday, I was painting a fellow painter, and you guys have heard me before say this, but whenever I'm painting a fellow painter, I feel a sense of liberty. I feel that there's no pressure. I feel that there is complete trust. So when I sense those things, I know I can have fun and enjoy a painting. And I think that that's what I did with Carl's portrait. I basically wanted to push expression. I didn't want to push it as much as I've done in other portraits, but I recognized a few little gestures. And in my mind, those gestures, even though they can be the hairline or the angle of the neck. In my mind, they are very, very abstract. And when I see them as these abstract shapes that have these specific gesture when they're put right next to other shapes, they become this sort of choreography of shapes. When I see that, when I recognize that, I want to push that. And I love that I can take that very abstract quality and then inject it with what I feel is the personality, the expressive personality that I see in the portrait. And I kind of fit those two in. I mean, sometimes it's a jumbled mess. Sometimes those pieces fit really nicely and they feel harmonious and they feel organic. And I think with Carl's portrait, that's what happens. I'm not really afraid when a portrait that I'm doing falls apart, when I'm trying way too many things and it falls apart, or when I'm breaking up, all these shapes and there's no sense of unity. I always think that those are challenges that I'm willing to take on, and those tend to be very exciting paintings for me. But I think with Carl's painting, it just kind of flowed and everything just kind of fell into place, and I really enjoyed it. For yesterday's painting, it was a very simple painting of Danny's sneakers. So what I loved about having a pair, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, was that it gave me a chance to actually speak about 2 different qualities in one same object. And that's something that I've been really interested in for many, many years. I haven't done it, recently, but I did tons of paintings where the repetition of a single form was something that I really enjoyed. And the reason that I enjoyed doing it is because in my mind, I always thought that I could present 2 versions of a same reality. And even though this painting doesn't break up into the abstractions of color and shape that I usually broke my paintings up when I was painting these repeating forms. Yesterday's painting was just very direct, and it was just a pair of sneakers. But my mind immediately went to those paintings because I realized that I was maybe going to put myself into a position where I had to repeat the same actions that I was doing in one hemisphere of the painting in the other hemisphere of the painting. Because, I mean, it had differences, obviously, but it was basically a mirrored painting. It had a vertical axis, and whatever was on the left side was kind of mirrored on the right side. Instead of letting that become something that was boring, instead of repeating the same exercise, and I felt that I could run the risk of it becoming boring because I started out and I kind of further developed the shoe on the left side, the sneaker on the left side. When I sensed this dread of having to do the exact same thing now on the other side, I was like, I can't let myself do this. I have to find a way for it to be interesting to me. And perhaps this is something that doesn't show in the final painting. It doesn't necessarily have to show. I mean, what's important about this is where we draw our energy from and how that energy kind of translates into painted decisions. If I was out of energy, if I was out of fuel, right after doing one shoe, you guys would have noticed. You guys would have totally noticed when I would have become bored with the painting of the second shoe. It would have shown paintings don't lie. When we are not interested, our painting denounces that. And it's going to be plain and simple for the viewer to recognize where we had problems, where we had issues, where we became bored. So that's the beautiful and the dreadful part about painting, that it is all about honesty. This is not a matter of trying to paint things differently. This is about finding energy. This is about finding what moves you and finding enough energy so that you can take on a problem and solve it effectively. And what I did is I convinced myself that I could actually speak about broader terms in that right side of the painting. I could speak about specific areas in the left side without really modeling very detailed moments, but the shoe on the left side is further explored in terms of its specifics, while the shoe on the right side is just left open, and it speaks, in my mind, it speaks more about the atmosphere that was enveloping both shoes. So when I recognized that, I was like, okay, now it's interesting to me. Now I can do this. Now I can take this painting further. And again, this is super, super important because it's not about just doing gimmicks. It's not about just finding a way to paint something differently. No, it's about finding the energy to just keep going. Finding the place in your mind, in your sensibility, where it can become exciting for you. When something excites us, we are never going to be bored. And it's usually never going to be about us, thinking about if we have the ability to paint something or not. This power that kind of feeds our intent almost like overshadows whatever our ability is. Now, obviously, ability at some point does become an issue and it is an obstacle. But, in the grand scheme of things, I've always told people, if it is about just learning how to draw and learning how to paint, those things are easy. Trust me. I mean, they are painful. I went through it. So I know how frustrating that can be. Trust me. But years have passed by and I realized, it wasn't tough at all. That is so not the toughest part of painting. There are so many things that are far more complex about painting that have nothing to do with value or color or temperature or any of the fundamentals of painting. So again, finding that drive, finding that fire, finding that source of energy that can light the fire in your belly and can keep you going, it is so important, particularly, and trust me, I've done paintings where I think the one I painted for the most time was about 8 months. We need to teach ourselves how to find that fire, how to light that fire again and again and again and again, because it is so easy to look at a big painting and say, I'm exhausted. I forgot why I wanted to paint this. Now the only thing I can see in it is flaws. The only thing that I can spot, it's my mistakes, my shortcomings. But if we can go back and we can remember that time at the beginning of the painting when we were so excited to paint something. We were drawing and studying things and just making a ton of compositions. And then we finally stretched that big piece of canvas and we look at it and it seems like humongous. It seems this thing that we're never going to overcome. And we start drawing and we put our underpainting and we are so full of energy. We're so ready to tackle this problem. But flash forward to, 3 months later, and this thing becomes this colossal beast that we start believing that we can't really take on. Sometimes these bigger paintings, these bigger endeavors, and let's not really think about dimensions. Sometimes it is about us being ambitious. And sometimes it could be a small painting, but it's incredibly ambitious and incredibly complex. Or it is something that requires, an emotional investment and a ton of stress while we're doing a painting. So again, this usually happens with bigger paintings, but let's not really think that it is exclusive to paintings that are large in dimension. For me, in particular, I remember that painting, and I remember it being just this beast that I don't remember how I powered through it. I think that at the time I was trying to think that I had to go through one of those paintings, that it was almost like this thing that every single painter has to try. And I think that that's what kept me going. But even today, when I see that painting, I just see a young person that was trying to be so ambitious and just came up so short. I would love to take on a bigger painting right now. I think that I have the maturity maybe, but more importantly, the peace of mind to take on something like that. This idea that if I see that painting and if I tell myself, yeah, it's going to take me 10 years to paint, or it's going to take me a year to paint, none of those would scare me really. I would be willing to just keep that painting as company. So maybe that's something that I'll do. When we finish this project, just take on something that is really big. It would be really nice. It could be really cool if you guys could keep me company while I do like this huge painting. Maybe our Painted Lives version 2.0 can be the execution of this bigger project. And I think that would be super cool. But anyways, back to today's painting. I think I'm speaking about understanding, identifying where that fire in our belly kind of lies in, because for the longest time, and I've spoken a lot about this, for the longest time, I always understood myself as a heavy-handed painter. And I still see myself as somebody who is very, very heavy-handed. When I wanted to paint my kids, and I remember Samu being born first, I felt this urge. I felt this almost like obligation to paint Samu. And I remember drawing him, many, many times and just thinking, I just don't have what it takes, in my mind, I would need a very soft hand, a very soft sensibility, because in my mind, my kid was beautiful, and I wanted to translate that feeling, that tenderness and that beauty, into my painting. Whenever I thought of artists that had that ability, my mind would go to Raphael, or would go to Bouguereau, or would go to Julia Benksur or Murillo, painters that have softness and tenderness in their brush. And I don't have that. I know myself enough to know that I really don't possess that quality. And that was something that was a roadblock for me, because I knew I wanted to paint my children, but I was convincing myself that I just didn't have the ability to paint my children. And this is something that can be very painful if you really think about it, because I had this desire to paint them, but at the same time, I was also feeling the weight of all these geniuses throughout painting history on my shoulders, kind of reminding me, whispering in my ear, you're not good enough. You're never going to be good enough because you don't have what it takes to produce a beautiful painting. And I'm sorry to say that I believed that for many years. And at some point, I was like, you know what? F this. F those voices. I know I'm heavy-handed. I don't care anymore. I'm going to paint my children. And I talked about this, but I think what ultimately changed my mind was just me convincing myself that even though there were far more capable artists, in the world, even though I knew painters that could paint circles around me, that had a level of ability that I was never going to be able to achieve, even though I was conscious, and I am conscious of my limitations, I told myself, nobody knows my kids better than myself. Nobody. If I have such a degree of knowledge about them, how can I not put that into use while I'm painting them? How could that not be important? How could the ability to just portray something faithfully be more important than all the knowledge that I have about my children and every single thing that I feel about my children? How could a drawing ability make up for that lack of knowledge? And I convinced myself that it couldn't. I told myself it simply can't. There's no way somebody can paint my children better than myself. I told myself that. And now I believe it. It is amazing. It is this amazing thing because now I tell myself every single time that I am the best person in this planet to paint the people that I love. And this is not about an ego thing, and this is not about me thinking that I have an ability that I don't. No, it's just that, when I think about Danny, I'd like to think that I can paint her better than anyone. I can paint her in my sleep. That's how much I know her. If I think about my mother, for God's sakes, nobody can paint my mom. And, when my dad was alive, nobody could paint my dad like I did. Period. I have to believe that. I have to believe that when I care about someone, when I have this emotional attachment, this very deep, strong emotional attachment to somebody, then that is going to show during the act of painting somewhere. Where? I have no idea. I have no idea. But I can tell you something. When I paint the people that I love, I think that through painting, I am reminded of my love for them. And in some way, that means something and it shows up. Don't ask me how. Don't ask me where. Maybe it's in my understanding of them. Maybe it's in the subtle gestures that I see in them. Maybe it's all the stuff that I see past, this very kind of tangible, quantifiable information that is just measuring and features and all these things that other people could translate better than I could. Maybe I can see past all those things. Maybe those very things end up being obstacles. So looking at today's painting, this is a painting of Fer. I've talked plenty about Fer, and today was just about engagement. Every single time she turns to me and every single time I'm like, oh, Fer, hold that pose. I'm going to take a photo. And I take a photo and I paint her. And I've been painting her and Samu for a very long time now. I mean, it took me a very long time to understand the reason and to find the courage to paint them. But as soon as I started painting them, as soon as I really started painting them, I never stopped. And I hope that, nature, life, the universe gives me a chance to paint them for as long as I'm supposed to be their company. And I hope that's a very long time because I think that when I paint them, it just makes sense. The act of painting something that of painting something that you love, just makes sense. Like everything falls into place. And the painting doesn't have to be the best painting you've ever painted. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. But what matters is that it feels like you're doing something that's right. And even though I'm painting Fer from this photograph, I think it being a photograph is of no relevance to me. I know Fer. I know what Fer feels like and what she sounds like and what she thinks about and how she feels about the things she thinks about and what she believes in or what she thinks she believes in. I know all those things by heart. I know every single one of those things by heart. That I can get when I can spend my time with her. If I'm going to spend time with her, I'd much rather just, sit down and listen to her tell me a story or make up a story, rather than just me convincing myself that I want to spend that time just telling her to sit still while I paint her, just because painting is beautiful when done from life. No, I don't want to paint from life, my daughter. I want to spend time with my daughter. I want to listen to her. I want to learn from her. So if I paint her from a photo, it doesn't matter to me. So I think the lesson behind this is that I always thought of myself as heavy-handed. I always thought of myself as just being this brute that just could never paint something as sensitive as a child that is, like someone Fer, my absolute life. And how I convinced myself eventually, it took time, but I convinced myself eventually that I could, that this was something that I could do. And then I convinced myself that this was something that I could do at such a level that I firmly believe, that I can do better than anyone else. Anyone else. Again, this is not about me feeling superior. It's just about me loving and understanding and being close to somebody much more than anyone else could ever be. And I guess that whenever I have, this information that's available to me when I see a photograph, I don't want to copy that information. I don't want to feel the stress of thinking that the portrait that I do of my kids is not going to look like my kids. No, that feeling does not enter my body or my mind. What I want is to say, oh, that image just reminds me of how Fer feels and of what I feel about her. And I can access that. Today it was a very simple kind of grayish painting about Fer looking back at me. And that's about it. So I guess in many ways today is about kind of proving, not to anyone, but to myself. And I guess that's the most important part, that photos in the end, again, they're information, but they are not the end goal. Today was a reminder, not that I have to go and paint from life, not that I have to go and feel guilty and say, no, real painters painted from life, and I'm not doing that. I'm just lazy and I'm a hack. No, today is a reminder that, hey, spend time with your daughter. When you see her, when she wants to talk to you about something, just sit down and listen. That's far more valuable than just saying, oh my God, I have to paint from life, or I'm never going to get into the pantheon of great painters. In the end, they can give my spot to somebody else. By the way, I wasn't getting in, so all I want is to be a good father. So in the end, I'll be happy with that. So that was it for today. Little emotional, I have to say. Join us tomorrow where we finish off this week by painting another fellow painter. He's a disaster of a painter. I really like him. And I'm going to take a lot more liberties than the ones that I took with Carl. So I'm going to be a little more expressive, and I'm going to channel and feel very comfortable, even more so than on Tuesday, with my inner Giacometti. So we'll see how we do. But that's going to be tomorrow. So I'll see you guys later. Bye. Thank you.